bringing out a music stand and a microphone. All right. So today we are kind of improvising what we normally do. Everybody hear me okay? We are improvising because normally we have screens at work, and of course I have things for you to see. So you're going to have to pretend. So I hope you like my photos. My son will be disappointed because he was in one of them. So we would normally have those, so you have to pretend. And I normally have a microphone that I wear up here so that I can walk around because it's very hard for me to stay in one place because I like to move around. So of course I have this, but I can move it around. And I'm going to be real honest with you, I think this is God talking to me today. See? Because I was talking with Mike earlier this week. He caught me in a moment of weirdness. I was actually exercising. It was kind of strange. But I'm going to be real honest with you. A lot of time goes into what we do. A lot of time goes into 20 some odd minutes. A lot of hours, a lot of work, right? A lot of time and effort. And how do I take what you have given me and try to make it right for whoever is going to be here this coming week? And I'll just speak for myself. I worry, okay? Because you know what? I want you to like me. I want you to like what I have to say. See, my goal, my heart, is that the things that I share with you will touch you, and that you will walk away and say, "You had a good one." I struggle with that. I really do a lot. And sometimes, maybe more often than I would like to admit, what happens is it's real easy to get caught up in what do I say? And how do I say it? And when do I pause? And when do I move over here? And when do I look at something? The whole theatrical aspect of giving a message. I get so wrapped up in that, and it becomes about me. And it's not about me. It's not supposed to be about me. And you know what? It's not really supposed to be about God. It's about God. It's about God. So you know what? I worked hard on this message. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, hope that somebody takes something home with them today. And whether you remember who I am, that doesn't matter. I hope something in this message will speak to somebody and you'll walk away and say, "That's good." Maybe he said something that I need. And I'll be real transparent. This is not on the notes. This is Michael being Michael, okay? Now we're done. Mountaintops. It's very dark at the mountaintop. This is improvisation. And this is why I forgot to tell you. This is why I think God is doing this, because you get so wrapped up in, okay, do the pictures, are they there? Do they come up when they're supposed to? Does the microphone work? And nothing works all the time, see? So you have to tap dance and improvise. So that's what I'm doing now. So mountaintops, more specifically, mountaintop experiences. Gregory Thornquist says a mountaintop experience is the transformation of one's heart. While at a higher elevation, from lukewarm to being on fire for God. Reverend Ruth Faith Santana Grace describes mountaintop experiences as those moments where we experience the power, the love, and the grace of God in a way that's difficult to capture in words. The great theologian Michael Miller, that was really fun, describes mountaintop experiences as those experiences where you have to stop and you just say, oh, that had to be God. I believe we can all have mountaintop experiences, and I believe that we all do have mountaintop experiences, but the problem is we don't necessarily recognize them. Right? Perhaps it was at a wedding. Maybe it was the wedding of our baby girl, our only daughter, who's our baby, when she got married. Maybe it was at a graduation, seeing our kids graduate from high school. Or maybe when we graduate from college and we were the first one in a very big family to be able to get a degree. Maybe it's the birth of a child. Y'all remember that, for those of you that first look at that child? Or maybe it was the birth of a child when you struggled for years with infertility and you finally had that child. Or maybe it's when someone accomplishes a task or achievement that seemed insurmountable, like graduating from seminary. So we all have mountaintop experiences at some point in time. We just don't necessarily recognize them as such. We don't recognize their value, their significance, how they can change us, how hopefully they make us better, how they might help us to trust God more, how they might help us to see God in those places where we normally wouldn't see God, how they might help us to love and serve the people of God. Let me share 3 instances of mountaintop experiences that I have. As I said, there's my son Joshua. On December 8th, 1988, after many years of unsuccessfully attempting to have a child, I had my firstborn. I didn't. We had our firstborn child, Joshua. And I want you to notice, I'm sure you can tell, but I haven't aged a bit, although he's 31 years old now. He does look like his mom. Thank you, I appreciate that. On October 4th, 1997, I had another mountaintop experience because I found myself in the National Mall of Washington, D.C. And I was with a small group of between 600 and 800,000 men as I was experiencing Promise Keepers Stand in the Gap, a sacred assembly of men. I wish you could have seen the picture. It was really cool. And nearest and dearest to my heart, and hopefully I'll say this without choking up. On September 17th, 2016, we got married.
Amen. Okay.
And getting married to my sweet wife, I truly experienced the love and compassion that God has for me. I'm sorry, I always get choked up.
Amen.
Anyway, has anybody had a mountaintop experience besides me? Anybody else? Good. You know who else had mountaintop experiences? But you can't guess since we're in church. You know who else had mountaintop experiences?
Jesus.
Good answer. It was Jesus. Good. Jesus and his disciples. Jesus and his disciples.
Yes.
On the mountain of Ararat, Noah's Ark came to rest after the great flood, and God made a covenant with Noah. Dealt with a rainbow.
Amen.
On the mountain of Moriah, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son. And Abraham, out of faithfulness and obedience to God, was going to do it. But God provided a sacrificial lamb, not a lamb, I'm sorry, a ram, in and amongst the bushes. Solomon built the temple on Mount Moriah, the place where substitutionary sacrifices would be made. Excuse me. On Mount Sinai, God revealed God's character to Moses, and they carved out the Ten Commandments. On Mount Carmel, Elijah, the prophet, challenged the false prophets of Baal to a competition to see which God would answer by fire. And God showed up big time. After that contest, Elijah ran away. He ran for his life and he headed north towards Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, to meet God there and listen for him in the sound of a whisper. Jesus taught his disciples up on the Mount of Olives. Jesus would go up on the mountains to pray and to spend time with God. And Jesus went up on a mountain to heal a great multitude and to feed 4,000. In the Bible, it seems like a lot of important events take place on mountains, on mountaintops, which leads us to our story for today. So if you have your Bibles, if you would turn, please, to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. We're going to be kind of reading at the very end of it. Matthew chapter 16. And just to give you a kind of a quick catch-up, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all those bad guy church-type people have been trying to get to Jesus and trying to trick him. And at some point in time, God asks his disciples, "Who do people say I am? Who do people say I am?" And they say, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He says, "But who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And God goes, "That's good." Jesus goes, "That's good. You've got the right answer." He says, "Blessed are you, Simon of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of heaven will not come over it." That's a little backstory. So, Peter has identified who Jesus is. And Jesus says, "Good, you've got it. I'm going to change your name." That's significant. I'm going to give you the keys of heaven. That's important. We're going to build a church on you. Then we go to verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the third day to be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord. Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Good old Peter. So Jesus turns to Peter, the keeper of the keys to heaven. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus says to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now we go into chapter 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up. Get up. Don't be afraid. And when they looked up, there was no one but Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead.
Amen.
6 days prior to this mountaintop event, Jesus told his disciples that he was going to Jerusalem to suffer at the hands of the religious, to be killed, to be raised again in 3 days. 6 days prior to this mountaintop excursion with his friends, Peter identified Jesus as God and was given the keys to the kingdom and was told that the church would be built on him, and then Jesus calls him Satan and says, Get behind me. 6 days before the life-changing event occurred, Jesus said, If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. If you want to save your life, you got to lose it. 6 days, just a week before, Jesus told his disciples that some who are standing here today will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. 6 days. 6 days. You know, when the Bible gives a specific time frame, that means something. That's a pretty exact time, 6 days. So Jesus takes his inner circle of men, Peter, James, and John, and he takes them on a trip up the mountain. They go to the mountaintop. And when they get there, Jesus is transfigured. His face changes. His face becomes like the sun shining, and his clothes become as white can be. And Jesus stands there as a divine figure, no longer of this world. Then before them stood Moses and Elijah. Moses perhaps representing the law, and Elijah perhaps representing the prophets. And good old Peter, always the one to jump in, speaks up right away and says, Lord, it is good for us to be here. How about I build some shelters for the 3 of you? For you, Moses, and Elijah. But it's interesting, while Peter is talking, they get enveloped by a cloud, almost like God is saying, okay, no. They get enveloped by a cloud, a bright cloud. And there's a voice from the cloud saying, This is my Son whom I love. Reminiscent of the voice that was heard back when Jesus was baptized. One additional statement is heard from the cloud. Listen to me. Listen to me. Regardless of what the disciples were thinking at that point in time, regardless of what we as God's people are thinking right now, what we need to do is listen to Jesus. To listen to Jesus. To listen to what Jesus said about his destiny and the destiny of his disciples, like we read in chapter 16. To listen to Jesus, as he said that to follow him, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. To listen to Jesus when he said that he was God's representative and he would go to Jerusalem and stand before the rulers, be killed and rise again. So the disciples fall face down in terror. But Jesus comes and he touches them and says, "Get up. Get up. Don't be afraid." Jesus, always being Jesus with love and compassion, touches them and says, "Get up." They lift up their eyes, and they're all alone. Peter, James, and John, and Jesus again. They're all alone. No Elijah, no Moses. It's just them. Jesus' appearance has gone back to normal. The world has gone back to normal. Everything has gone back to normal. But the disciples, they can't go back to being normal. They can't go back to being normal. Because they had an incredible encounter with God. And you know, we can't be normal when we had an incredible encounter with God. We can't go back to being normal. They had been changed by their time with Jesus. So Jesus tells the disciples, go back. Go back now. We're going to go back down the hill. And don't tell anybody about what you've experienced. Don't do it until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Perhaps then this mountaintop experience will make sense to them because they weren't there participating in it. So we all have mountaintop experiences at some time or another. We all have mountaintop experiences, some greater than others, grander than others. And mountaintop experiences are essential for our growth. Mountaintop experiences are essential for us to move forward in our faith journeys. They help us to face the future, and they help us to deal with the challenges of life, especially when we find ourselves not on the mountain, but in the valley, where we are called to serve. See, but the problem is, those mountaintop experiences are amazing, but they're few and far between, and we like them. We want those mountaintop experiences because we get a mountaintop high, and then we have to go to a valley low, and we don't want to go to the low. We want to feel the presence of God like we did during that experience. So what do? We try to recreate that experience. We wear the same clothes we wore, we listen to the same music, we burn our candles, we burn incense, whatever we were doing. We go back to the same place in an attempt to recreate that experience of where we found God. And we get so caught up that we end up being more focused on the experience than God. We're more concerned about the experience than God. Perhaps the whole reason that God allows us to have the mountaintop experience is so that when we are in the valley, and we will be in the valley where we spend the majority of our time as God's people, the valley where we live most of our lives as God's servants, the valley where we are most often confronted with hurts, and we feel the pain, sadness, emptiness, and loneliness, and sometimes even loneliness and pain in ourselves. We can remember. We can think back and we can remember those mountaintop experiences. And remember the God who we saw there. The God who allowed us to have that experience. The God who allowed us to experience the extraordinary. The God who allowed us to see things that literally blew us away. And we can be reassured of His presence. Because it's the same God touching us and reassuring us in those challenging valley moments, as when we were up on top of the mountain. Those moments in the valley where we spend the majority of our time as His children on His mission. Those are special times of refreshment and encouragement on that mountain. Those are the times that we find ourselves apart and separate from the real world. Those are the times when God met us and revealed something to us about Himself or others. So we came away changed, deeper in love with God, deeper in with a greater faith for God, and a deeper commitment to serve God. So when you find yourself in the valley, because you will, remember that God is there with you. God is walking with you. God is holding you. God is whispering in your ear. Get up. Don't be afraid. Get up. May we always remember the God of the mountaintop experience. And may we always remember the God of the valley experience. The one who is always present. The one who is always touching us. The one who is always saying, don't be afraid. Get up. Emmanuel, God with us. Amen. God is always with us. And you know,